is going to be, okay, everybody heard that. So this will be available for folks to look at later as well. Anne is a calligrapher and watercolor teacher. She has shared her expertise with us on many occasions. She is also a St. John's Bible lecturer. We heard a little bit about life in Fargo earlier, where she lives, and she's been a member of the Colleagues since 1997. She has a website at that address you can see, and she's also on Facebook. I think Anne has done a good job of introducing the topic, so without further ado, I will turn the program over to her.
Well, thank you so much, Colleen, and everybody here at the Colleagues of Calligraphy. I am absolutely thrilled to be with you all today and to talk about I called it my pilgrimage of art and lettering. And I had two travelers for a significant portion of this trip. So Gail and Mike Nichols, Gail is my sister. I'm hoping they can go on camera, and I'd like them to say hi. They are in England and they're joining us this evening. So I saw them earlier.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Lovely to be here with you all this evening. We're about an hour's drive west of London, and I'm so delighted that Anne was going to be doing this presentation, because we had the most marvelous holiday together that has resulted in her putting this together for you this evening. So thank you so much for letting us rejoin the trip with you all this evening.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks, Mike. So let's take a look about, so here's the team, Gail, Mike, and Anne. And the goal of the trip was I wanted to take some time for me to do what I wanted to do, completely selfish, right? Because we go to England fairly often. Gail lives in England, but I'm traveling with my husband, traveling with my family, and we're racing around. And so when I want to do some of the things that I want to do, I don't very often have a lot of time. I'm just sort of quick, have a look and sneak it in, because a lot of the things that appeal to me don't appeal to other rational people, right? I wanted to find the real things. We are very, very spoiled in this digital age that we can look at a beautiful manuscript like you see up on your monitor, and the internet brings everything right up close to us. But there is a magic, there is a permanence of finding the real things and seeing them and breathing that air and being in their presence. You don't get the sense of size. You don't get the sense of domain looking at pictures in books or on the internet. And so these things exist. These things we study, these things we're interested in, they're real, and I wanted to go find them. And I wanted to take some time to learn from a master. We're very, very spoiled with learning opportunities, and I wanted to spend some time with a master of illumination, and I have long followed Patricia Lovett, and I have long wanted to do her 3-day medieval illumination class. So those were my goals. And then I had some to-dos. I have a brooch with the Laughing Cavalier on it. That was my mother's. I now have it. And I wanted to take it back to England. So I wanted to travel with my mother. I wanted to go to Lyd and do what Gemma Black had done many, many years ago, and see Irene Wellington's Bailiffs of Lydd. So I wanted to make like Gemma. I wanted to go to Winchester and see their Gospels. And the Winchester Gospels had served as the inspiration for the size and format for the St. John Bibles. And so I wanted to think like Donald. I wanted to think like Donald Jackson. I wanted to go to Ditchling, the center of the arts and crafts movement in the UK, see Edward Johnson's grave, and I really hoped I could have tea with Ewan Clayton, who lives there. And then I wanted to go and paint with Patricia and spend some time studying with a master. So those were my to-dos. And for years, I've been collecting this Google Maps. So anytime somebody tells me something that's interesting, I go and I mark it on a Google map and I save it. So I had all these things, all these little blue dotty things. Seven Oaks is where Patricia Lovett lives, that I had this bucket of things that I wanted to do, and it was time to start emptying my bucket. And so where to go? So with Gail and Mike, we sort of trimmed this big list down to some things that were mutually interesting to all of us, as well as things that they had on their list that I'd never heard about, and was part of our map, part of our route. And so using Google Maps, we figured out a kind of a route. We had some constraints. I had emailed the mayor of Lydd to say I'd like to come and visit and see Irene Wellington's work. And they came back and they were very explicit. Monday, September 27th, between the hours of 9 a.m. and 12:30. Okay, put that on the calendar. Patricia Lovett's class was going to be from October 2nd to October 4th. And the Franz Holz exhibit with the Laughing Cavalier was starting September 22nd. So those were some of the date and time factors that we had to put into our plan to figure out the timing and juggle our itinerary. So in my world, everything goes into Excel. I had a page for every day of the trip. I had all the things I wanted to do, where the nearest tube stop was, or taxi stop, or parking garage when we were driving, what it was going to cost me. And then I lined these things up with a Google map. So here's the British Library, this is London, here's the Hardy Tree, Sherlock Holmes Museum, the Wallace Collection, etc. So we had a page like this for every day of our trip. And we had a couple of, maybe not rules, but a couple of things that if we didn't do everything, that was fine. Because if we got stuck into one thing, that was going to be good. If we found other things to do, that would be fine too. But we had our must-dos, and then we had our would like to do's. So this was our planning document that I put together, and then we worked off of this each day of our trip. So I flew into the UK. And Gail had a work function in London. So the very first day we headed into London. And London was in Paddington Bear mode. It was the celebration of the books. And throughout London, you had these little Paddington Bear statues that they were calling the Bear Trail. And they were absolutely charming and delightful. The British Library had a special collection on the writing of the Paddington Bear books and the history. Here's Gail and Michael getting splashed by Paddington's marmalade because that's his treat. The Welcome Collection is a place I would recommend you all go to next time you go to London. It's a free exhibit. Currently, they have a Richard III special exhibit on, but it's owned by the Wellcome Drug Company. And it's an art exhibition with a social justice theme, as well as another collection of art and medical art. But it is absolutely fascinating. This is paper cuts of a microscopic image of a sea organism. And the variety of paper media related exhibit in this place is to be marveled. We ran out of time. We didn't have enough time to do everything. So it's on the list to go back to. And I had forgotten until I was going through the photographs and I saw, you know, the pictures of us with our masks on. And then this is me. England had very, very stringent COVID requirements. It was touch and go if I'd even be able to get into England. And Patricia Lovett had said not to worry, you know, if I couldn't make it, she'd refund me the money. I had to have COVID tests before I got to England. And then within 48 hours of being in England, I had to do a special COVID test and mail it in. That was probably the most stressful part of the whole trip, was could I get in and then could I stay healthy so that I would keep passing the COVID tests. And touch wood, I haven't had COVID ever. It was very challenging juggling the tests and the timing and all that stuff as part of this trip. I popped into Kensington Palace, as one does, and Queen Victoria has a really oddball selection of inkwells that are these sort of dancing maidens. There's 6 in the set, and they are absolutely charming. And I've always viewed Queen Victoria as being very austere and very stern. And all of these little inkwells are frivolous. And it was absolutely delightful to get a view into her life, that these were things she would have had around the palace, and they were a little bit of fun. We made it to the Laughing Cavalier with the brooch, and here's Gail and I I'm holding the brooch, and we FaceTimed my mom, and so we could all enjoy that little reunion. The Wallace Collection is a free art museum in London, also well worth visiting. And underneath some leather covers, they had a selection of what they call found manuscripts. Now, what they mean about found manuscripts is that somebody found a manuscript and then cut it up, and they have what was cut out. So beautifully interesting, beautifully done, and well worth a visit. Mainly European manuscripts, quite a bit of Portuguese work as well as Spanish. Some beautiful, beautiful stuff. The thing that always intrigues me about visiting Europe, but London specifically, is we get very much, you know, you're on your phone, you're trying to navigate where you're going to, and you're looking down. In London, you need to look up, because there is art everywhere in London. There is lettering everywhere in London. There is gilding everywhere in London. And people are just gosh darn proud of their buildings and their heritage and when something was built or who owns it. And they take pride in that. And you will see this pride or mark of history or mark of time beautifully represented on the side of the building. And this was just a little thing I grabbed in the city of Westminster. Running through London. And then my holy grail, the British Library. I can spend all the time in the world at the British Library. My brother-in-law, Michael, collects paper money, and we had a lovely time looking at their money collection in the British Library. And the calligraphy on old money is to be admired, and it's well worth checking that out. The British Library is free to go into, other than a special exhibit. So Paddington was a special exhibit. And we always think about the British Library as being the holder of old things, the Lindisfarne Gospels, Sinaiticus books, the Gospel of Cuthbert, things like that. We think about old books, illuminated manuscripts, you know, fun stuff like this. But they have a huge collection of what I think of as new books, as well as the first editions of Dickens, some of the Shakespeare's. If you want to see John Lennon's handwritten notes when he wrote Hey Jewel, because it was called Jule, for his son that became Hey Jude, British Library's got it, and it may well be on exhibit when you pop in. So pop culture, modern culture, as well as some of the, you know, what I think of as the dusty books, the things that really make my heart sing. And that I come up to the British Library and I see these big gates and I'm like, I'm home. I'm
And
thinking, yes.
I'm sorry, I wanted to catch you before you went to your next slide, but I just didn't. I had a question about those found manuscripts. Where were they exactly?
At the Wallace Museum, the Wallace Collection.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. And you can go see the Laughing Cavalier. He lives at the Wallace Museum. He's so handsome. So the British Library has 170 million objects. If you saw 5 items every day, it would take you just over 80,000 years to see the whole collection. They have everything from the Magna Carta to Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks. They have the 4th century Codex Sinaiticus, which is the oldest set of Gospels end to end. The site by St. Pancras Station is the largest public building in the United Kingdom, built in the 20th century. They used 20 million bricks to build this place. It is gorgeous. Now, the gates and the carving are of interest to us as calligraphers. Lyda and David Kindersley designed the gates and the entrance carving. She actually got a member of the British Empire for her work. And then all the other signage was done by Mervyn Kalansky, who has a number of fonts to his name. Some of the books that I pulled out here, the top one is the Suffolk Hours, which is a Gothic manuscript from Paris in the late 14th century that has the good old sort of ivy border that a lot of us started out learning when we first learned how to do borders. You know, here's the original, one of the original sources. You can actually go and have a look at it up close and in person. Down in the bottom right-hand corner, this book is Hildegard of Bingham. It's her calligraphy and her music for an opera she wrote, which as an abbess and a nun was highly scandalous. But then this is a woman who invented her own language and ran her own scriptorium. So she was all about living life large and doing things differently. So the British Library is always well worth a visit. And I was so excited to see these two manuscripts out on exhibit. The Lindisfarne Gospel is nearly always out on exhibit, except when it goes home to Durham every 3 years. And the Gospel of Cuthbert is out on exhibit. So the Saturday we went down to Winchester, a little town south and a little bit east, a little bit west of where Gail and Mike live. An absolutely charming place that is really the seat of British history, from some of the kings. King Alfred's base was there. And Jane Austen's grave is in the cathedral, which some would say is, you know, the holy grail of English literature. There's the Great Hall, and we'll look at that in a minute. Lots to see and do. It's a great place for walking around. Lovely carving, beautiful, beautiful carving. This is the name tag at St. Swithin's coffin, which is in the cathedral. And here's an illumination out of the Winchester Gospels. So the Winchester Bible is 4 volumes, and they built this Bible really played a unique role in shaping early English history. And the Winchester Cathedral has housed this Bible from when it was created up until now. They have, 3 years ago, they put together an exhibit called Kings and Scribes, The Birth of a Nation. It's a stunning 3-level exhibit, partly funded by lottery money, which I think is just delightful. And it houses some of the cathedral's greatest treasures, including the 4 volumes. And the elevator between the floors is hand gilded. People come and look at the elevator. They should come and look at the Bible too. The Winchester Bible is a Romanesque illuminated manuscript produced in Winchester between about 1150 and 1175 for the cathedral. It's the largest surviving 12th century English Bible. And it's really important to us to understand medieval art because it's not finished. The dang scribes didn't finish their jobs. So we can see their process of how they would have finished out a page if we sort of go backwards through what is unfinished. The other interesting thing is that at one stage, one page was torn out, and it's actually in the Morgan Library in New York, and they're not giving it back. So if you want to see one page of the Winchester Bible, Morgan Library, New York City, otherwise England. It was the work of a single scribe. He wrote it out in Latin, and then there's 3 to 5 artists who did the artwork, the decoration, the illumination, the gilding. The colors are as intense today as they were 800 years ago. It is absolutely mind-blowing how beautiful this book is today. The volumes are kept in a special museum inside the museum. They don't allow photographs, and Gail and I snuck in and took pictures. So we were super stealth bunnies, and we're alive to tell the tale. They didn't have to chop our heads off. The entire museum on kings and scribes is a testament to the power of the written word, the power of scribal arts, paper arts, and the heritage of the scriptoriums and the role that they played to empower kings and governments in England. And it was much more than what I expected. Much, much more. I thought I was going to see, you know, a room with 4 Bibles and then, you know, we'd be done. But I could have spent hours there. It was only when my brother-in-law threatened that he was going to start putting on some of the armor that we were like, okay, it's time to go. Because we didn't want him arrested. The cathedral itself is very, very small when you compare it to some of the other British cathedrals, but it's absolutely magnificent in terms of what is inside of it. They have what they call the Cromwell Bible. They have an original King James Bible commissioned by King James I. If you go to the Great Hall, they have a reproduction of what they believe the round table would have looked like. And then on the wall, 40 foot high, is a family tree going all the way back to King Alfred and including the Knights of the Round Table. It's a tour de force of calligraphy and art and history and mythology all on one wall. An amazing testament to human endeavor and fun. Winchester gave me far more than I was expecting, and it is absolutely delightful.
Anne, I have a
Yes.
short question. How far back is the date to King Arthur?
I can't remember, and I can look on some of my photographs and see what I find.
Okay, just curious what they say.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So we went back to my sister's house, and then I was going to take the train down to Ditchling. And Ditchling is a little town that Eric Gill, and the only time I'd ever heard about Eric Gill was that Gemma Black teaches a class on the lettering of Eric Gill. And I knew he was a carver. And he was actually a sculptor as well. He went to Ditchling in 1907 with his apprentice, Joseph Cribb, and some of you may know his lettering and his carving. And they created this little point of interest for craftsmen. So more and more people started coming to this tiny, tiny little town of Ditchling. In 1921, they founded the Guild of St. Joseph and St. Dominic, a Roman Catholic community of artists and craftsmen inspired by the medieval tradition of a guild. And the arts and crafts movement was very deeply rooted and energized down in Ditchling. This community had its own workshops, they had its own chapel, they thrived for many, many years. The affairs were wound up in 1989. Everything kind of decreased, but the Ditchling Museum of Art and Craft was created in 1985, and it was renovated in 2013 and expanded and rebuilt to become a center, a library, a museum of the art, the work, the effort of people like Edward Johnson and Eric Gill. And now we have our modern calligraphers like Ewan Clayton, Patricia Lovett's got documents going in there. A lot of the British calligraphers, Anne Heckle's got stuff, Irene Wellington, the people that we've heard about from that sort of golden age of calligraphy, their documents, their papers are being donated to the Ditchling Museum of Art and Craft. Ditchling, the town, is so small, it doesn't even have its own train station. So I took the train to Hassocks, and then I walked 2 miles to Ditchling, which was great fun. So I felt very rural English strolling down country lanes on my way down to Ditchling. The Art and Craft Museum of itself is a restored 18th century structure. It's beautiful oak. And it's even the entrance building. Here's the entrance doors, and then you come into the entrance. It's meant to be its own exhibit, to sort of take you back to a time of yore and let you imagine working in an environment like that, carving something, working on calligraphy. And you get the idea of the past and the present coming together and being welded as something that will grow. It was really exciting to me that I didn't come away with the sense that this place had been built and it was as good as it was ever going to be. There is capacity for more exhibits. There's capacity for more education. There's capacity for more curatorship of documents and materials from artists who have aligned to the Art and Craft Museum. They have a couple of galleries with dedicated exhibit space. They have some freestanding structures. They have a kids' play space, which I thought was brilliant. And it was modeled after a book, and it changes every couple of months. They pick a new kids' book and then they reimagine the kids' play space. And this one was on something about the jam sandwich. And so they've created things for kids to play with while others can roam around the museum. So the kids interact with art, they interact with a book, they interact with an experience inside of this place, which I thought was just great. They had big letters for the kids to play with, and anytime I can get children playing with letters, I think it's a good thing. Some of the exhibits were just like, oh, and this is where seeing it yourself is like, ah. So Edward Johnson's writing desk, he set out the requirements of a desk with an inclined slant panel, this little drop-down panel here. He would lift it up to put his inks on. You can see the little sort of splatters of inks. It came out of an image he had drawn in 1898 of his studio in London. And there's an essence that comes off of this. There's an energy that comes off of this, that you go, a real person sat here and worked. That the book I have of Edward Johnson's Illuminating Writing isn't just dead. It's real. There's a real person associated to this. There's real human effort. There's ink on that desk. There's dirt. There's scratches. It's not this pristine thing. There's a lot of long hours that all of us as calligraphers who slog over our art, you look at that desk and you can feel the investment of time. You can feel the investment of study. Edward Johnson didn't take a lot of private students, but this is the study book of one of them. Her name was Marjorie Bournes. And this was her teaching book with him from the 1920s with his notes in it, and as he was teaching her calligraphy. And then they had a tiny exhibit of Ewan Clayton's work. And I had gone there hot to trot to buy some of Ewan Clayton's work, and they had nothing for sale. And I'm like, you guys have got to fix that. And I couldn't have tea with Ewan because he wasn't in town. He was out of town. He had, because of COVID, he was pretty much being very reclusive. And so next time, the man doesn't know it, but next time I'm coming for tea. So Ditchling, this tiny little town, it has 2 pubs. It's just quaint, it's cute. Here's a picture of me with my mask on in front of the desk. St. Margaret's Church has this graveyard with these wonderful headstones. Here's Edward Johnson's headstone. All of us have heard about taking a line for a walk, and I saw this there, and they had a different exhibit of a guy who does these beautiful line drawings. And Edward Johnson, other than how we know him as calligraphers, he is probably most well known as the guy who invented the lettering style used by the London Underground. And I didn't, you don't realize until you go to a place like Ditchling, where you see the letter carving, where you see the printing, where you see the calligraphy in so many different ways, forms, shapes, how interwoven our lettering world is until you see it all represented in one place. Absolutely stunning, absolutely stunning. I then walked back to Hassocks. I went past a coffee shop where they have a whole lot of cats, and you can go in, big sign on the door, warning, if you're allergic to cats, don't come in here. But you can go into the coffee shop and you can adopt a cat or pet a cat. I had a cup of coffee and a sandwich and then got on the train. And then met up with Gail and Michael to continue our adventure, because we had a date in Lydd, and the town clerk secretary had been very specific about when we should arrive. So we pulled into the town of Lydd, tiny little town. We can't find the mayor's office. So we ended up calling them, and they said, it's right by the church. Here's the church. Here's the mayor's office. Wonderfully inconspicuous. Wouldn't know it's the mayor's office in the city council chambers unless you have called the office and gone, I'm still can't find you. And across the road is an absolutely delightful coffee shop that I highly recommend. So I have long been fascinated by the work of Irene Wellington. One of my conversations with Donald Jackson at St. John's University, he had been talking about her work, and that's what sort of got me into it. And I started looking into her work, and her finesse, her detail is absolutely appealing to me. Now, she was born in Lydd, her family came from Lydd, and she died in Lydd. She studied art at the Maidstone School of Lettering under Arthur Sharp. Many of us have his books. She was introduced to Edward Johnson's Writing, Illuminating, and Lettering, the book. And in 1925, she got a scholarship to go to the Royal College of Art, where Johnson was teaching 1 day a week. And that was how she got into calligraphy and was tutored and received an exceptional calligraphic education. She started then teaching at the Central School of Arts and Crafts in London, and Anne Heckel and Donald Jackson were her students. So we're getting this, you know, lovely genealogy of calligraphy in England coming, you know, through my travels. She started this piece. It was her last major piece in 1967. And then she died in 1984. Ewan Clayton's written a book about Irene Wellington, and it is beautiful to read. It is it's a prayer to Irene Wellington. And he talks about her being like Edward Johnson was, and like I am. I want to make art. And that when I make art, I get better. And that process of making art teaches me more than me studying more and more, but not making stuff for finished. So often as calligraphers, we practice, but we never make stuff for finished. We never traumatize ourselves or discipline ourselves to finish something, to give it or sell it or hang it on a wall. And both Edward Johnson and Irene Wellington believed that the process of building art to finish it with some goals, with some, you know, aspirations to it, would teach you far more and stretch you far more as an artist than just practicing pieces of it. Irene Wellington talked about doing real art as opposed to just doing practice stuff. And Ewan Clayton picks this up in his book. And if you've read the book Golden Thread that he wrote, you'll find he picks up on that as well. So this Bailiffs of Lead is this tour de force of calligraphic detailing of all the bailiffs going back to Henry VI in the town of Lead. And I just was thrilled to get the energy coming off of this, to see this work up close. It is not a particularly big piece. In my mind, it was going to be, you know, 12 foot wide, and it isn't. And it is detailed and fine work on beautiful vellum, with excellent gilding and boatloads of shell gold. Absolutely gorgeous work with all sorts of details, notions. You know, here they're talking about where the town of Lead is, which is by the harbor. Here's the town clerk mayor talking to Gail and Michael about how the smugglers used to come into Lead, and this is how Lead is most famous because of the port of Lead. And so here, when she talks about the port of Lead, she writes, her lines of writing are like water. Some of the shell gold work, the background work, the seal. Here is the torch, and she's got the words are written like flames going into the torch. So these little bits of humor, little bits of innovation, just things that change the way it comes across. We've got heavier lettering up top, and then we end up with this fine, delicate stuff. Absolutely gorgeous. And then
And I have a question about the particular ink that was used in that piece, the red ink.
it's
What that might have been made out of?
It's stick ink.
Vermilion.
Chinese sticking. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
This piece, I was actually looking on the Lids, the town of Lids insurance roster, and it's insured for £10,000. So $11,000, maybe a little less. So this was the presentation panel. Here it is sitting on the wall. And these are the council chambers, and they've got a whole lot of calligraphy in this council chambers that's well worth visiting. So here's the seal of the town of Lyd. And here's the seal that Irene Wellington did. So, Houston, I think we got a problem. She writes here, transpose the colors on the shield, alas, a scribe's error. The red and the blue are the wrong way around. So it's like, yes, if Irene Wellington can make mistakes like that and just go, oh, oopsies, here you go, little glamorous note of apology. I can do that too. So notes to self, when you make a mistake, just own them and go, alas, scribe's error. So the last part of my trip with Gail and Mike was to go from Dover through Folkestone up to Canterbury. Folkestone was really interesting to me because they have a huge collection of outdoor sculpture, and some of it's indoors, and every 2 years they do grants for sculptures. And so what is otherwise a rather ho-hum little town has become this really funky, diverse collection of sculpture. And sculpture includes all in the one building, all the bathroom windows, bathroom mirrors are etched. Here's the Folkestone Mermaid is done by Cornelia Parker, and she's a lot like me. She's old and dumpy, and she's dang optimistic, sitting looking out to sea. So this is not your Copenhagen, young little nymph. This is a real mermaid, and I think we can all be real mermaids. They have a Banksy that appeared one night, and then somebody cut the wall down and brought it to America, sold it. And they caused a big stink, and the person who bought the Banksy donated it back to Folkestone. So now it's back in Folkestone behind glass. Loads of fun stuff. This was Hastings, actually. We stopped at the Battle of Britain Memorial Museum. And this is an absolutely eerie piece of sculpture of a airman sitting, staring out over the cliffs of Dover, looking to France. And he's wearing his urban jacket, the big fluffy, furry jacket with a big fur collar, which means you can't see his rank or his designation. So you don't know if this is a pilot or a crewman. You don't know if it's a captain or a junior ranking person. And the message behind the museum is it doesn't matter. Everybody who fought in the Battle of Britain was equal. Everybody played an equal part. And this message of equality and egalitarianism and being true to the mission was compellingly strong inside of this museum, and quite a different take to what I had mentally where it was always sort of the flashy people. But in this remarkable museum, the message was, it was everybody that made them successful, helped them be successful. We were all equally important. Then in Dover, they have a recreation of a scriptorium, and they've done a very, very nice job of trying to represent what that would look like, and some of the documents, to try and create like a living museum where there's a kids area where kids can go and play and learn. This was in the Dover Castle Church, this beautiful commemoration documents, and you see these throughout England, and they just blew my mind. This one is from World War I, but you see similar documents with similar levels of detail, quality, gilding, right up to date for current affairs around the world. The Women's Land Army Museum was this rickety, sort of very strange little building we found, and we went in not quite sure what we were going to find. And it's an homage to the women who stayed behind and what they called the Land Army in England, who were so important to keeping the infrastructure and resources going to support the war effort coming out of England. So just this charming little piece of calligraphy, just this little treasure sitting inside this little building, where human spirit and the spirit of women was just, it was blasted to you that without these women and the work they were doing, the gratitude of the empire was just profound. And then any of you that are ever up for a swim, well, you know, if you're going to swim the English Channel, there's a pub in Dover where they have beautiful calligraphy, and then you can doodle on the ceiling, put your name and what your swimming time was. So anytime any of you are going to swim the channel, let me know and I'll direct you to this bar, and you can do some really nice calligraphy up on their ceiling. We stopped into Operation Dynamo, and this was a large scale piece, and the picture I have, you can see in the background, is really, really blurry, and I didn't get a really nice picture of the whole thing. But these are all the craft that were involved in Operation Dynamo, the different groups of people, the ships, the planes, absolute, just a tour de force of calligraphy. But to me, it was so interesting that they had taken the time to document and capture and then create this celebration of human effort, with all the little names of all the little boats and all the little craft and everything they did. And it says up here, the vital weapon of any army is in its spirit. And it's, you just got that sense of absolute pride. And just charming calligraphy, charming art, charming celebration. If I'd heard about this, I would have gone, eh. But when you see it and you see it in the context, that's where seeing stuff for real, making the effort, doing the pilgrimage, going and finding the real thing has a fundamental impact. There is something that socks you in your chest that looking at it on the internet would never have done to me. I would have gone, oh yeah, it's lovely, and just moved on. But we went through the Operation Dynamo exhibit, and this was towards the end, and it was just, it's like a one-page summary of absolute human spirit and energy and vigor. And I feel that coming out of the text. It's just remarkable. And then we wandered up to Canterbury Cathedral, and we were there for a night. And you can spend 2-3 days in Canterbury. It is a lovely, lovely village town. The lettering history reaches all the way back to St. Augustine. And if you don't know who St. Augustine is, you need to go find out who St. Augustine is and go do some reading. Because his approach to the written word and the delivery of the written word is what created Lindisfarne and the Iona scriptoriums. And that led to Cuthbert. And that whole Northeast England calligraphic tradition all came out of what St. Augustine wanted the church to be doing with the word of God. So Canterbury, which is where he came from Rome at the behest of the Pope to come and turn these crazy people into Christians. And he set up shop in Canterbury. The ruins of his church are there. And he was the first bishop of Canterbury. And when you realize how much we think about beautiful manuscripts, Book of Kells, Lindisfarne Gospels, all reach back to this guy, Augustine, who hung out in Canterbury. And things like the compass rose, where'd that come from? Comes out of Canterbury. The detailing, the collection of art, the carvings, the attention to detail throughout the town, but specifically inside of Canterbury Cathedral is amazing. Most people, when you talk about Canterbury Cathedral, they're going to think about death in the cathedral, the murder of St. Thomas à Becket, right? But the cathedral itself has a lot more. There is still a scriptorium there. There is a library, and it is back on the bucket list to come back another time, because there is much more to see and experience in Canterbury. There is a soul and an essence and an oldness, but a modernity inside of Canterbury that really makes you feel like history is alive and well and growing. We took a canal ride. If you go to Canterbury, do the canal ride. I know it's touristy. Do the canal ride. It's phenomenal. The Canterbury Cross is a recent discovery of an 8th century cross that Canterbury are now using, very much the same way as Durham are using St. Cuthbert's cross. And it's become the moniker of the city. The Thomas Becket pub, when in doubt, Canterbury is either going to talk about Becket or they're going to talk about Chaucer. The Chaucer Museum unfortunately didn't survive COVID. So I was a little disappointed about that. So Geoffrey Chaucer, he was an English poet, he was an author, he was a civil servant. He's best known for the Canterbury Tales that I had to read in, I think, 9th grade or 10th grade. He's been called the father of English literature. Sometimes you hear him called the father of English poetry. He died in 1400, but he created this standard for writing excellence. And this is an amazing statue in the town. You can see his writings here. The cross, Becket, and Chaucer really define this town, its history, and its place in the world. And its place in our calligraphic world cannot be underestimated. So I said goodbye to Gail and Mike. They drove home. I got on the train and I'm off to Seven Oaks to go and start my class with Patricia Lovett. She has an MBE for calligraphy. She's chair of the British Heritage Arts Society, which is an organization she founded 6-7 years ago for the preservation of at-risk heritage crafts. And it's well worth looking up. She offers a 3-day medieval illumination class. She typically does it every May. Last year, she did it in October because we thought the world would be done with COVID by then, right? So people always ask me, what did the cost? It's not cheap. It's well worth it. It was £550 for 3 days tuition, all the supplies, and all the food. Accommodation was extra. And she supplied the vellum, the coils, the whole kit and caboodle, everything we were going to need for 3 days. She gave us carte blanche in terms of what we wanted to do. She gave us some suggestions, and I picked this horse out of the Aberdeen Bestiary. The Aberdeen Bestiary was created at Cambridge, and King Henry VI gave it to Aberdeen College, and that's why it's called the Aberdeen Bestiary, and you can go there and see it. We used all traditional materials as far as possible. We worked on vellum, we made our own gesso, we used 24 karat gold, we did our work with quills, all that good stuff. So this was my first tracing of my first piece. So we made gesso, and then we laid gesso. We did our gilding. We used traditional pigments for our painting. And she worked us hard for 3 days solid. We started at 8 o'clock in the morning and we finished at 5:30 every day. And then we had a glass of champagne, which seemed like the right thing to do after a long day of medievaling. This was my first piece, which was my test piece. And here I am starting to work on my second piece. And that's the completion of my piece. Here's Patricia Lovett. This is her house. And she has one of 8 made 100% reproduction of the Gospel of Cuthbert. And it's same size. It looks like the Gospel of Cuthbert, the whole kit and caboodle. There were 8 of them made. The British Library, who she is on the board of, and she does a lot of teaching for the British Library, and she's written a number of books for the British Library. They gave her one of them. And so I was mumbling about Gospel of Cuthbert, and she ran off to the house and came down and gave this to me. And I spent 20 minutes before she said, "You need to get back to work." And I'm like, "Yes, ma'am." And just being able to go through the Gospel of Cuthbert up close and personal, like you can't always do. The ability or the opportunity to spend such dedicated time with somebody who is a master at this kind of work, who teaches this, who studies this. This is her major living. To be able to spend that amount of dedicated, focused time is an absolute gift. And she is a treasure trove of information. So, you know, anything you wanted to know, she either knew, she had a book, she had a sample, or she just knows straight off the top of her head. And that is truly a wonderful thing from an education point of view, but an experience point of view, to have that gift of time to just sink yourself in and really get to know the tools, the methods, and play and push and pull everything. It profoundly changed the way I approached art and allowed me to seriously start doing a reach back into a more serious exploration of medieval art that I have been doing and I absolutely enjoy. After Seven Oaks, I went to London. I met up with Gail and Mike again, and I flew home. So surprising finds as I wrap this up after you've been listening to me here for an hour. There's art and calligraphy at every turn in England. The preservation, the pride in heritage arts, the using of heritage arts, whether it's carving, whether it's calligraphy, painting, buildings, to celebrate events, to celebrate people, is, I think it's part of the English DNA that they know where they came from and they don't want to lose touch with that. And so they're building on that all the time. So the more you look, the more you find. The ability to get hands-on, to get up close, whether you're at the British Library, whether you're at Winchester, whether you're at Lyd, that is so important to all of us, that if you become passionate about a subject or an area of interest, it's lovely that we can read books. It's lovely that we have the internet. And for many of us, that is so much more than people had 10, 20, 30 years ago. So we really should enjoy that. But if you get the opportunity to get up close with any of your passion projects or passion pieces, do it. It changes you. When you physically see human endeavor and you can look at something sideways and see the buildup of the ink or the scratch marks in the gold, or here I've got my hands over the Lindisfarne Gospels, or you see a modern interpretation of Thomas's name in Canterbury Cathedral, or the old flooring in Winchester Cathedral that's 1,000 years old and it's going strong, people. That changes you. And that's the power of a pilgrimage. That's the power of taking time to get up close and personal, to experience the experience and not just fly by. And then you got to have some fun because it's not all serious. And I was lucky. I had 2 great travel partners, lots of laughs. My sister kept telling me, strike a pose, because apparently I can't pose. So here I am in Cornelson's art shop, which is next to the British Museum, mandatory. We could do a whole talk on Cornelson's. And I've got these great big paintbrushes because it was a wonderful time to celebrate. Wonderful time to celebrate. So on that note, I'm going to strike a pose again and say thank you so much for spending time with me, for listening. I would encourage you that if you ever want to do a trip like this, please talk to me. We talk about putting together a trip and taking people because we just loved it. And I'd love to share this with more people. So if that's something that may interest you, let me know. But at this point in time, are there any other questions out in chat, Sally, that you didn't grab me on?
I don't see any other questions, but I did see someone right before your last statement that said you should lead a group tour back in England. So there you go. So even before you mentioned it, someone thought that would be a great idea.
I have a question, Anne.
Yes, Mary.
Maybe everybody else knows, but I'm intrigued by the use of red back in the old manuscripts. It was kind of like that was the main thing. Did it besides just being royal, did it have any other significance, the color red?
The vermilion.
Yeah.
Some of it had to do with blood. A lot of it was the red for royalty, the red for the church. You'll see a lot of use of red as an offset to the black. People talk about the word of God and the blood of Christ, the word of God in blood, the word of God in black, the blood of Christ in red. Sort of like the words of Christ in a modern Bible very often are in red. So the way the church used color sort of flowed out into the secular world as well. So anytime you wanted to make a statement, you went with red. The vermilion was also relatively inexpensive. Lapis lazuli, which is the blue, horribly expensive, right?
Okay. All right.
And not as eye-catching.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you think blue-black on a cream background, it's nice.
It always
Yeah.
comes back to money, though.
It's a reality, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
Lapis lazuli was the stone that if you grind it down, it's very hard to get good pigment out of it. If you did get good pigment out of it, it was terribly expensive.
Mhm.
You know, that was the sign of an expensive document, was as soon as, you know, was there a lot of gold? Was there a lot of lapis lazuli? You know, how much verdite was in there?
Okay, thank you.
So red and black were the working tools.
Okay.
Any other
Thanks, Mary.
questions?
Yeah, I was gonna say, we can just open it up to questions. You can just unmute and ask Ann anything. You don't need to go through the chat.
And I will stop sharing and then we can like see people. There, you're all on notice.
Anne,
Yes.
when you talked about the St. Cuthbert book that Pat owned, Patricia Lovett owned, you said that the British Library had commissioned some, how was that produced? Was it produced on vellum or was it a, how was that printed and who did it? Did they commission artists?
It's a printing. It's a reproduction, not a it's a printed reproduction.
It's
So
not a facsimile.
It's not a facsimile, no. It's a printed reproduction. So they have taken images of the pages and printed them.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yep. Yep. So I always say that I own the Gospel of Cuthbert because the British Library, the British Library never buys anything.
Right.
British Library isn't like the Morgan Library that buys art or books. The British Library says, you donate to us. They don't buy anything. So the Gospel of Cuthbert was donated to them, but the Stonyhurst Monastery wanted some money for their book. So they did a public funds appeal and I sent them $100, which probably paid for 2 letters, but I still say it's mine.
I think it's strange that they only printed 8 of the St. Cuthbert, because the British Library is always interested in putting things in their bookstore to sell. They could have easily had made more and sold them.
Yes, but these are bound in the leather. It's the whole, they did 8 of them. They did CT scans on the Gospel of Cuthbert about 4 years ago. And so they took all of that information and then said, can we actually make a book given the information we have? And so these were like their learning, their experimental things. You know, can we do that binding, because that's the original binding. This book has never been rebound. So it's very unique in that aspect. Most of the manuscripts have been rebound because they wear out, fall off, or the Vikings stole the covers, right? So Gospel of Cuthbert has its original binding. It's never been rebound from when it was made 1400 years ago. So it's very, very interesting. Very interesting. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and attention. Thank you, Gail and Michael, for joining us and participating in our little journey here as well. I do appreciate the gifted time to share this trip and our adventures. And if I can ever be of service to you, give me a shout. It's Ann Casey up in Fargo. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Follow your passion, right?
Yeah.
I have one more question for Anne.
Oh, yeah.
So often when we take a workshop, we go home and we put the things away. Do you have any plans in the next 3 months to do something significant as a result of the class with Patricia Lovett? Any project?
Yeah, I've got. Oh, I'm back to doing some more. Whoops, disappeared. I'm back to doing some more bestiary work. But what I want to do is I want to do some bestiary animals based on extinct animals from South Africa.
Mm,
All right.
wow.
So bestiaries are these books of crazy animals. Some of them were real, some of them people made up, some of them were based on travelers' tales, some of them were based on myth, some of them are based on folklore. And there was associated text with them that taught people, reinforced religious notions on people coming from an animal, right? Like hedgehogs are selfish and sinful. And people who behave like hedgehogs are sinful. Now, why are hedgehogs such evil little creatures? Well, hedgehogs run around grapevines and they roll around and their little spines impale the grapes. And they have the grapes on their spines and they go home and they feed their children the grapes from the vineyard, right? So what have these hedgehogs done? They stole stuff, deceitful, and they stole our wine, double deceitful, and they don't own up to it. Sinners. So you get these whole bestiary animals and stories that describe human behaviors and associations, that part of it was coming from the church, part of it was coming from myth, part of it was, you know, one day some guy saw a hedgehog, he had grapes stuck on his spine and they went, hedgehogs do this all the time. Well, I don't think so. You know, great vineyards don't pop up out of the ground in England all the time. So these bestiaries, and there are probably a dozen of them that are well known. The Getty Museum had an amazing display of bestiaries a few years ago that I went to, of which the Aberdeen bestiary I still think is the finest. The Bodleian Library has two that are magnificent. But the stories are always the same. The creatures are always the same. The order is always the same in a bestiary. And so what I want to do is create a bestiary of South African extinct animals. because we have lost an amazing number of animals in South Africa. And they all have their African tales associated with them, the African folklore, the people's folklore around those animals. So this is my next project. So I started working on it about 6 months ago. That and spending a lot of time on Catherine of Cleves, like crazy pants, and then teaching and, you know, doing everything else. So yes, that's what I'm planning to do. I want to do it in the style of a bestiary, paint it the way that we were taught, and then do some of the calligraphy around the images to give the folklore or the moral lesson or some of that stuff.
I have just two brief points. One is that I have been recently using Hildegard of Bingen's music in my studio, and that's really wonderful. If you could, it just is a peaceful thing. The other thing is that I'd just like to mention that tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we have our meetup, calligraphic meetup. And so a lot of you who are on here could join that. You just need to get the Zoom link from Sally, and you probably have already gotten it. But we've had a great time recently on that, and we need more people to come and join us. 2 o'clock tomorrow.
2 o'clock tomorrow.
And that's something that we were doing before the pandemic. We were doing it for a number of years, and we met in person, but it's been so great to translate it into the online format, especially for something like tomorrow's topic, which is, you know, digging into something in your studio and so forth. Otherwise, we were always schlepping things with us to various coffee shops or brew pubs on Wednesday nights, but maybe we can get back to that one day. But thanks for reminding everybody of that, Jean.
Yeah. All right. I think, Sally, are you closing the meeting down?
I'm here. I'm here. I had, it's a funny thing. There's a beach ball blowing around down our street. It just looks so funny. You know, 17 degrees and this little beach ball is just blowing around. So I was trying to get a little video of it. But anyway, yeah, we're all set. If just like Jean said, if you're interested in the meetup and you haven't got the link, just email me. I put my my email address in the chat. So I'm all set if you are, and I will send out a link to everyone who came today. If you want to check back in at the recording, it'll be up for 30 days.
See you tomorrow, Gail and Mike.
Thank you
See
very
you all.
much, everybody. I thoroughly enjoyed. Great memories of our trip with Anne. It was really marvelous. And we do talk a lot about doing a tour with some of her calligraphy kinfolk over in the US. It would be wonderful if that did happen one day, because there is so much to do and see on this darling little island. Thank you. It was wonderful. Thank you, Anne.
Thank
Thanks,
you. Thanks,
Anne.
everybody.
It was
You, everybody.
wonderful.
Thanks, Anne. It was great.
Bye. Stay
Bye.
safe.
Bye.